Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Idle Park Talk Show. If you are just tuning back into the world of geopolitics after taking a break for your own sanity and mental health, like most people do, good for you. However, geopolitical developments did not halt while you were away. And here are a few developments you need to know. The protracted war between Russia and Ukraine continues with no end in sight. And no matter what you may have heard about Ukraine's accomplishments from the usual Western talking heads, the fact remains. Russia has continued to seize, capture, or as Russia describes it, liberate territories from Ukraine. Russian forces currently occupy and control roughly 19 to 20% of Ukrainian territory. So the question we should be asking is simple. Is Ukraine winning? And if the answer is yes, how? Because after years of fighting, billions of dollars in Western assistance, thousands of weapons systems, and enormous human cost, Russia is still there. Well, I will leave the Ukraine-Russia war situation for another day. Another thing that has not changed is that the United States now find itself in a prolonged and increasingly costly war with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Iran has America in a very difficult position. That brings us to another fact that has remained unchanged for the past several months. The conflict is increasingly centered around the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow but increasingly important waterway that was open to international shipping before Israel convinced the United States that starting a war with Iran was a good idea. Iran decided to close the strait in March, sharply reducing commercial shipping through the area, and since then, the Strait of Hormuz has never fully reopened to unrestricted international shipping. Iran continues to exercise significant influence over navigation there and has used the strait as leverage in its economic warfare against the United States and other economies around the world. Again, no matter what you hear in the news, Iran did not start this war. Whatever economic pressure you may be experiencing today, my argument is that it is largely the consequence of the arrogance and overconfidence of the Trump administration. If you feel someone has to be blamed, then here is my answer. President Donald J. Trump. In recent weeks, the America-Iran war has spilled beyond Iran. It has spread into the Red Sea, Yemen, Iraq, and the wider Gulf region. Iran-aligned Houthi forces in Yemen, or the Ansarallah, have opened a much more significant front against Saudi Arabia and Saudi-linked shipping. The Houthis have claimed attacks on Saudi oil tankers in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and have maintained pressure on Saudi-linked shipping. In effect, one of Iran's allies is now creating serious disruptions around another important maritime choke point. That choke point is the Bab el-Mandab Strait. With the Strait of Hormuz severely restricted, Saudi Arabia and some other Gulf states have had to consider alternative routes for their energy exports. That makes Bab el-Mandab extremely important. Attacks on Saudi-linked oil tankers have already contributed to a significant reduction in shipping through that waterway. So here is what has developed. Hormuz is the northern maritime pressure point. Bab el-Mandab becomes the southern pressure point. Now, to be fair, I should make one clarification. The Houthis do not literally control the entire Bab el-Mandab Strait in the same way that Iran has exercised substantial influence and control over traffic around the Hormuz Strait. What they have demonstrated, however, is their ability to threaten attack, and disrupt shipping through that corridor. This creates a potentially serious problem for Washington and its Gulf partners because instability at both choke points affects energy supplies and commercial shipping simultaneously. Speaking about the expanding war, on July 29, 2026, some 12 days ago, a drone strike hit Egypt's Mediterranean port, causing fires involving two gas vessels. The reported targets included a United States-owned Marshall Islands flagged floating storage and regasification unit, as well as a Greek-owned LNG tanker. It is not yet obvious whether these drones were launched by the Houthis or by Iran, but what is relevant to me is this. Either the Houthis or Iran was able to launch a drone all the way to Egypt, apparently without being detected in time to prevent the attack. If confirmed, I consider this a significant escalation. It sends a warning to the United States and its allies about the potential reach of Iranian and Iranian allied forces. One of the most interesting aspects of this conflict, and something that may have taken the United States by surprise, is that Iran appears to be trying to control the pace of the escalation. At the beginning of the war, Iran was largely a reactionary force. The United States Central Command would choose the day, the time, and the target. America would attack, Iran would retaliate. Then Central Command would pause its attack, or President Trump would announce a ceasefire, and Iran would wait for the next attack. That was the pattern, a predictable pattern, but something has changed. Iran's strategy now appears increasingly focused on managing and directing the escalation. Instead of giving Washington one predictable battlefield, Tehran and its allies are creating pressure simultaneously through Hormuz, the Gulf, Iraq, Yemen, and Bab el-Mandab, regional military infrastructures, and commercial shipping. To me, it appears that Iran may be deliberately maintaining strategic uncertainty about where and when the next escalation will occur, and that uncertainty creates a serious challenge for US war planners. If the United States has to worry about multiple potential fronts, multiple potential targets, then it has to spread its air defense systems, reposition military assets, protect personnel, and constantly prepare for the next possible attack. All of that affects how America plans and launches its own strike against Iran. So, in my opinion, Iran is now driving the conflict to a much greater extent than it was at the beginning of the war. Another important fallout from the US-Iran conflict is the ammunition and strategic resource problem that America is now facing. The Iran war has created serious competition for American and allied air defense ammunition. Even before this war, military analysts and former military officials, including people such as Scott Ritter and retired Colonel Douglas McGregor, had raised concerns about American weapons and air defense stockpile. Their argument was that years of military support for Ukraine and NATO's confrontation with Russia had already placed significant pressure on Western weapons inventories. Now, several months into the Iran war, weapons stockpiles remain a serious concern. The Center for Strategic and International Studies estimates that approximately 65% of US Patriot interceptors were expended between February and July, leaving fewer than 850 compared with approximately 2,330 before the war. Saudi Arabia has reportedly used approximately 86% of its PAC 3 inventories. Think about the problem this creates. It is a three-way or perhaps even a four-way problem. Ukraine needs air defense missiles to fight Russia. The Gulf states need air defense missiles to defend themselves against Iran and its allies. The United States needs missiles for its own forces and operations, and Israel needs air defense missiles if it decides to re-enter the war against Iran. Which brings me to another question. Where did Israel go? I thought this war with Iran was supposed to be a joint venture between Trump and Netanyahu. Why has Israel suddenly disappeared from the picture? Netanyahu dragged Trump into a war with Iran, and when things did not go as he promised, Israel appeared to have stepped back and left Trump hanging. But that's a conversation for another day. Let me make one thing clear. One cannot claim that the United States has run out of ammunition. That would be inaccurate. The United States still has enormous military capabilities and significant ammunition reserves. But this war has exposed serious limitations in some critical precision weapons and air defense stockpile. Important to highlight that replenishing those weapons take considerably longer than consuming them during a high intensity war, and that matters. There is another question I have wanted to explore. Why has President Trump repeatedly called off planned attacks on Iran? This is where the story becomes particularly interesting. Trump has repeatedly threatened, prepared for, and then postponed or cancelled major military actions against Iran at the last minute. The Associated Press has reported that this pattern has occurred several times since since the conflict began. The most recent example came around August 1st to 3rd, when Trump reportedly postponed a planned major attack on Iran after appeals from Gulf partners, particularly Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, those appeals may certainly be one of the reasons some of these strikes were called off, but I believe there is more to this story than what meets the eye. The Gulf states are seriously concerned that this conflict could become a full-scale regional war. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf states are already exposed to Iranian retaliation. If another major attack occurs, their military bases, airports, energy infrastructures, and shipping could become significant targets. So naturally, these countries have a strong incentive to tell Washington, give diplomacy another chance. Don't turn this into a war that none of us can control. The second reason, in my opinion, is the increasing cost of the war. This conflict has been increasingly expensive for the United States, not just in billions of dollars, but also in human cost. According to figures, approximately 16 US personnel have been killed and hundreds wounded. The ammunition problem is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The United States can sustain an extremely powerful military campaign, but sustaining a high-intensity missile war for months creates an entirely different logistical challenge. You can have the world's most powerful military and still face the reality that missiles have to be manufactured, transported, deployed, and replaced. Then we come to what I believe may be one of the most important political and military miscalculation of this entire conflict. The assumptions that Iran would collapse within the first few days of the war. The opening campaign was supposed to be shock and awe, a decapitation campaign, hit the leaders destroy the military infrastructures, destroy the command structure, and force Iran to surrender. But this did not happen. Iran did not collapse. This is an important distinction. Military damage is not the same thing as political capitulation. The Iranian government continues to function. The Iranian military remains capable of retaliations, and Iran's regional network continues to create serious problems for America and their partners. So, Washington now faces a very difficult question. How much pressure is required to achieve the political outcome it actually wants? And that answer has remained elusive for the Trump administration. But ultimately, the answer to that question may determine the direction of this entire conflict. Will we see this de-escalation and an eventual peace agreement, or will we see another escalation of the war? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the question, and that is where we leave it for today. If you found this analysis informative, please share it with your friends, subscribe to this channel, and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and see you soon.